morning and welcome everyone. My name is Todd Sanders. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Chamber. We are so pleased to welcome you to today's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Employer Forum. These quarterly forums gather our members together to discuss strategies and solutions surrounding DEI initiatives in the workplace. Our goal is to help your organization begin to take steps towards bringing DEI practices into your company. And the Chamber is doing this along with you, and our committee can serve as a resource. Now, hopefully, you and your teams have had an opportunity to utilize our DEI toolkit for business, which can be found on the Chamber's website. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I encourage you to do that and start down that path, and certainly don't hesitate to ask us any questions. I would like to first take a moment to thank our DEI Professional Committee, as well as our sponsors of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program. So a big thank you to our friends at APS, SRP, Cox Communications, and Ideas Collide. We truly appreciate all your support, not only of this program, but of everything you do in our community. Now, today's program is structured to be both informative and interactive, so we can answer your questions and provide some guidance. To start, we're going to be hearing from our panel of presenters, and we have Sentari Minor, Vice President of Strategy and Chief of Staff at evolvedMD, Ines, who's the Senior Executive Recruiter at Duffy Group, and Carletta Miller, HR Business Partner at ArchWell Health. Now, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions throughout each presenter section, and we encourage you to do that. We'll open up and then we're going to open it up to an audience Q&A at the end of the dialogue. So encourage you to be thinking of your questions, put them in the chat. Feel free to submit, and then once we have time, either during each presentation or at the end, we'll certainly try and get to every one of those possible. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our two representatives from our DEI Professional Committee and our moderators for today's panel, Tango Edwards and Veronica Aguilar, to kick off our presentation. Tango, Veronica, thank you and welcome. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Todd. We are so excited to be here. Hi, y'all. My name is Veronica Aguilar. I'm the Vice Chair of the Valley Young Professionals Board and Vice President of Recruitment for Teach for America. Incredibly passionate and excited to be in this space with you all today. Now I'm going to pass it on over to my amazing co-facilitator, Tango.
Appreciate it, Veronica. Hey, everybody. Tango Edwards. So I am the new rep for VYP. For the DEI committee here for the Phoenix Chamber. I'm based down here in Gilbert, Arizona. In my spare time, I like to do some boxing, hang out with my son, and currently preparing for the Ironman race that's going to be here in November. So that's a little bit about me. As it pertains to our topic today, I'll go over what we'll be discussing. You can read the title here, The Inclusive Impact, Crafting Your Personal Brand and Elevating Your Career. So specifically as it pertains to minorities, the consensus is kind of that these folks that fall into the category for women, people of color, LBGT, have traditionally been at a bit of a socioeconomical disadvantage with wage gap, with access to resources, potentially victims of conscious or unconscious bias, things of that nature. So while society has made strides to work towards correcting that, we here at the Phoenix Chamber DEI Committee also want to make it a priority to mitigate any disadvantages for the folks in our community. So today we're going to focus on a couple key aspects. We're going to have these great panelists that are going to be here. And the key aspect here is going to be landing kind of a well-compensated job role here in Phoenix. And we're going to break this down into the three topics that you see in the slides here. So building your personal brand and resume building. So composing your story, showing your experience, and conveying that in a way that's going to resonate with recruiters, getting past screening tools, and conveying that to the hiring manager that you're going to be interviewing with. Interviewing tips, so understanding the stages and rounds of the interview process, getting familiar with kind of the STAR method, and guiding the conversation that's going to best highlight your skills and capabilities. And finally, negotiation, the great part where we all get to make more money and be more compensated for our skills. Really understanding the holistic value of different comp packages, utilizing competing offers, understanding kind of pay structures, salary, equity-based incentives, and things like that. So a lot of words, but hopefully it's going to be really beneficial that you can take into the job market going forward. So I'll give it back to Veronica to introduce our wonderful panelists for today.
Thanks, Tango. And I love these topics too, because it really is, no matter where you're at in your professional career or journey, having these topics and having the refresher is always so helpful for not only you, but also your employees. So really excited for our time together. Now, we would like to start off the discussion with some information on personal branding and resume building. Here to kick it off is Sentari Minor, who will give a brief overview, and then we'll open it up to Q&A as mentioned before. So Sentari, thank you and welcome.
Can you guys hear me? Perfect. Hi, guys. I'm excited for this conversation. A big thing that's part of my life is personal branding, and I talk a lot to young professionals, even seasoned executives, about how to build your personal brand and why it's important. And germane to this conversation is, from a DEI lens, developing your personal brand might be the best tool in your arsenal to not just level the proverbial playing field, but also differentiate yourself. So additionally, as more women and people of color enter managerial and executive roles, it becomes more important for the quote unquote face of leadership to publicly reflect our ever-changing world. So that's what we're going to talk about, personal branding. And we'll go into stuff about resume if you'd like to, but when we were kind of formulating the content for this, I said, resumes, that's something we should certainly touch on, but really moving into the future of work, a lot of it's going to be based on your online presence, especially LinkedIn. So a lot of the conversation that we'll have in this brief time will be around that. So I don't know if any of you saw it, but recently I pinned an article on personal branding, and I believe that some of the main points of that article are very valuable in this conversation. So first, I think it's important to recognize what personal branding is. And I love this quote from Gary Vee that says, your personal brand is how others perceive you. Your personal brand is your reputation, and your reputation is in perpetuity is the foundation of your career. So when you think about going out for your next job or even being promoted in your current job, understanding that how you show up and what you portray into the world plays a big part in how successful you'll be in that. And I think it's also important to think about that quote because it underscores much of what I know to be true about personal branding, which is everyone's looking, so especially your current and potential employers. Personal branding is mostly about taking control of your own narrative. If you do it right, it can provide you invaluable credibility, and then your success, I cannot stress this enough, your success will be directly related to how your brand is portrayed in the world. And I think all of these points are especially important when you think about professionals who might have traditionally been undervalued or overlooked from a DEI standpoint. That personal branding can help you stand out against your peers and also maybe give you an opportunity that you wouldn't have had otherwise. For everyone on this call, I want you to understand that the first tenet of branding is also the first tenet of helping you with your resume, your LinkedIn, whatever that might be, is that you have to be really, really thoughtful about how do you determine and articulate your unique value proposition as a professional? What are you most passionate about and why? What are your superpowers? I think about what are the things that you can do better than anyone else, and what makes you stand out from your peers? And when you spend some intentional time thinking through those things, and thinking through why someone should pay attention to you in the first place, why should someone want to promote you? Why do they want to hire you? What value you provide? It's a really fun exercise to start writing those things down, and that'll begin the framework of your professional narrative. And all that again goes into your resume or your LinkedIn profile. And the next part is probably the hardest part for people, but I call it let your game speak. Perhaps the most difficult part of personal branding is that people don't feel comfortable bragging about themselves. And it's a shame because everyone on this call is very, very accomplished. And so spending some time to think about how do you want to talk about the things that you're doing or the things that you've done in a very public way. LinkedIn's a great forum for this, but this is also some things that you can put on your resume. So I always tell my staff and my team, just keep a good journal of all the things that you accomplish in a given day or a given week, month, year, and then look back on that and say, oh, wow, I did these things. And now this is why I have some value here. So I do an entire hour-long presentation on personal branding. So wanted to give you some high-level look at that, but wanted to open up for any questions that you have about it on the why, and then probably some questions about the how do you get started. And so with that, if there are any questions around that high-level update.
Sentari, I have one for you if no one else
Go for
has
it.
one right now. When it comes to telling that story and sharing those things on LinkedIn, how do you balance what is personal enough but professional enough and finding that middle ground on not oversharing but not being, too uptight with just professional updates?
That's a great question. I think my biggest advice would be authentic to you. So do whatever feels comfortable for you. I've always had the great privilege of having a professional life that allowed my personal life to blend in. I think about work life integration. So for me, my personal life is my professional life. I spend a lot of time speaking about the business case for mental health and why executives should care about therapy and counseling. And that obviously blends into my personal life, right? So I would say for folks who are thinking about what is my next step or how do I even start, think about what you are comfortable putting out there. You don't have to be me. What you want to share, and also think about what would actually make you get to the next level. So for me, I've been able to cement not only my brand, but our company's brand in kind of being the experts around executives and mental health, right? That started from me just having a passion about it, and it's been evolved into something that evolvedMD uses. So I think just my advice, be as authentic as you can, and also try not to emulate anyone, just know what's comfortable to you. And also, I think one of the things, Tango, would be also what is aligned with your employer or future employer. So I luckily sit on the executive team here at evolvedMD, so I get to kind of set the tone within our company. There might be some more conservative organizations in the Valley that may not align, and you'll know that pulse, and you'll know what that looks like. So kind of edge up into that line, but do what's comfortable for you and also what makes sense for the employer that you're trying to attract.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Great insight.
Any other questions? And I can't see the chat if anything's in there, so.
Hey, Sentari, this is Marcus. Now, obviously, I think there's a wide variety of users, but what if somebody's just starting out or figuring out how to either navigate or start up their LinkedIn page, or just that early stages of learning how to branding? I guess if you just give some maybe pointers or tips around that.
Yeah, so like they feel like LinkedIn does a really good job of kind of setting a pretty easy template to put in there. You can be as little as robust as possible. But I think just even starting your LinkedIn profile, just if you don't have one today, go on LinkedIn.com, start your profile, and it's pretty straightforward on what you should put in there. Veronica or Tango on the back end, I actually have something that we use for our external facing staff. So we have a pretty like intentional template for our folks. So I can give that to you all so you can understand like how to build out your profile. But I think the advice there is just to start. And also a thing that I've always been thoughtful around is as you start to build out that profile, especially if you think about building out your resume, I think one of the big things that people forget to do is actually be quantitative in results. And so there's one thing to say, I led sales for a major corporation in the Valley. It's another thing to say that I increased revenue year over year by 125%. So being very specific about the metrics and the impact that you've made in your jobs is really important too. Like that's something that people always forget on resumes and their LinkedIn profiles. The numbers matter.
Perfect. So kind of a follow-up with that, I've always heard like differences of areas. So a lot of people go 10 years back, depending on, I guess, how many years you have in your profession. But I guess ideally, what do you normally see are people either updating their resumes or, going far back and trying to update that, like their LinkedIn information?
Yeah, I would say my advice would be LinkedIn Evergreen. So it's a scrolling document. So put LinkedIn. My LinkedIn goes back to my first job after college. So it's good to have that context. I think for your resume, the good rule of thumb is your last 2 or 3 jobs, especially because if you're anything like me, you've kind of switched industries. So actually, sometimes it's just the experience actually doesn't really make sense to have on the resume anymore. It makes sense on the LinkedIn, but not on the resume. So I would say 2 or 3 jobs back, and then again, spend more time on the actual impact metrics in those jobs rather than the functions themselves.
Sentari, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I was just looking at your LinkedIn. One of the things I've noticed that we all have sort of the business-centric posts that we always see, but I noticed when you do something that sort of relates to you as a person, I did something about my dogs, people tend to gravitate towards those. I mean, so do you suggest adding sort of part of who you are in your posts or
Absolutely.
not?
Yes. And going back to what's authentic to you, I do that all the time. I think you can see, and LinkedIn has some really good algorithms around this. when it's about you as a person, those are your biggest, those have been my biggest posts, right? Because understanding, I think I did one of a little bit ago about just like me in my backyard with the dog, and like people love that. There's one about me and a CEO. We were just at lunch and we were just cracking up about something, and people love that. So I say get as personal as you're comfortable with, but also I think it's important I talk about this in my business. Business case for mental health, for people to see professionals as humans. And so I think that humanizes you, makes you vulnerable, and also makes you more accessible. And also they realize that like you can be very accomplished, but also have fun and enjoy your life too, which is very important.
Thank you.
Sentari, I have another one that you kind of touched on. So changing industries is kind of a big thing with the job market, having to be adaptable and maybe hop over for something that you're not as familiar with. How do you incorporate that story and narrative into the new resume and cover letter and things like that, to touch on the fact that you have now moved from one role to the other, so your resume is not going to have the depth that the relevant depth that may be seen with other candidates, but those underlying skills are still there?
I think that's a good question. I think the big thing would be going back to like your superpowers and expertise. So probably even if you skip an industry or move industries, you're probably still doing something functionally similar to what you were doing in a previous job. So I think translating, like, I'm really good at sales. And not me, I'm just saying as a person. So you can be a sales VP, but you can also go to work and develop in a nonprofit, right? So it's those leaning on the actual skill set that you have, why those are your superpowers. But I also think that right now, the new future of work is that people are moving, as they should. Like if you're not learning more or earning more, you need to get out of the job. And I think more and more people, I think 10 years ago, that would be seen as a bad thing. But now seeing people that have like moved industries, done slightly different jobs, and like that person's adaptable, they can learn quickly. They understand how to really get into a new industry. So I see it as a plus. And then my next article I'm actually writing in the next couple of days is going to be about soft skills. I think we're moving away from this idea that you have to be super technically focused on things. More so, employers are hiring for, can you communicate well? Are you good managing an ambiguity? Are you a critical thinker? Can you think through problems? And if you can articulate those things on your resume or LinkedIn, you'll get any job that you want.
Hey, Sentari, kind of jumping on top of that question. So just hearing from a lot of young professionals currently, or other professionals just navigating their next job or career move, I've heard a lot about the use of artificial intelligence, especially with them going through their resumes, and now an AI really is the one reviewing the first round of resumes. So can you talk about a little bit more about how maybe we should update our resumes either using certain key phrases, or I don't know if there's any other tools, tips, tricks?
Yeah, for larger companies, and it makes sense, right? They're getting thousands of resumes a day, so they're really looking for keywords that show fit and alignment. So I think depending on your industry that you're going into, if you're going to apply to a large company, a great piece of advice would be to you can find these tools online to look at and scan your resume for the job that you're looking for. So if you're going for VP of marketing or an operations manager, seeing what those keywords would be and matching those up to the job description, because that's going to be very, very important. But I also think and this is going to sound easier said than done, but I always think that if you can find that hiring manager on LinkedIn or know someone that knows them, get your resume that way. Like that's probably going to be much more productive and fecund than the other. It's like knowing that person is going to help you more than optimizing your resume, but absolutely optimize your resume, because that's going to get you at least through the first kind of door.
Sentari, I love the call out to go direct to the hiring manager. So I actually just went through a lot of this process, and making that pivot to finding folks and directly sending them resumes. You really skip the line on going through if you see LinkedIn, there's, like I said, there's thousands of resumes. People are applying. If you wait longer than a week after it's posted, there's so many folks. Another thing I noticed, and I'm curious your point of view on it, going out and proactively or over the course of your career, getting letters of recommendation and endorsements and things like that. I see a lot of that on your LinkedIn. How important do you think that is as like a differentiator, having other people vouch for you and your skills, if that distinguishes you when things get kind of down to the line?
That's a great question. I think, and I've written a lot about this, the power of your network and networking. It's invaluable. I think I've interviewed for maybe one or two jobs in my career, and the rest were people were like, "Oh, I know him. He should do that." And so that's super helpful. But I think even going to the point of we were just talking about with the hiring manager, I think that if you're looking at a role and you see someone that you know works there, you can always email them your resume and say like, "Hey, can you get this to the right person?" So your networks really, really, really do matter. And then also having folks throughout the years that can vouch for your character, your competence, and your work ethic are very important. So as you start going through your career, if it's a peer, if it's a coworker that you say, would you be willing to be a reference for me down in the future, or better yet, a boss, and say like, hey, down in the road, maybe not next job, but the next job, I might need you. And that's been very, very helpful. I had a boss early on in my career who's stayed as a professional mentor, and he's been great. And my previous job, he was one of the people that they called, and really his testimonial really helped seal the deal. So yes, collect those folks, collect those testimonials, because they'll be very, very important to you later on.
Yeah, I think that's a great shameless plug for the chamber and for the VYP. The larger your network is, the more folks that may be at a future employer that you can leverage and have at your disposal. So
yeah, it's really important. Any other questions? I think the last thing I would offer is that I always say this when I present, I'm pretty available, guys. So if there's anything that you guys want to talk about on the back end, or you just didn't feel comfortable asking in this large group setting, just reach out to me via email or LinkedIn, actually LinkedIn, and let me know. I'm happy to get coffee, go through anything. I'm here as a resource as you need it.
Thanks so much, Sentari. And he is telling the truth, y'all. He has been there for me and supported me in various things as well. And send a LinkedIn message. And Sentari is someone that can definitely support you all. So thank you so much for sharing with us a little bit about personal branding and resume building. Now moving into our second topic, we have Carletta Miller, who will be discussing both the interview and the promotion process. Carletta, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, you all. I feel honored to be amongst you all's presence. Awesome people. So I'm going to discuss the interview and promotion process. My perspective will come from the interviewer, with tagging a few pieces of the interviewee perspective as well, if you'll allow me to do that. So how do you foster diversity in the interview process? Begin with hiring diverse talent. Understanding diversity brings different perspectives by way of experiences, beliefs, and they increase your chances as an organization of seeing the full picture when it comes to bringing ideas to the table. What does diversity mean? It's a vast range of genders, ethnic backgrounds that are represented. It could be representation from a diverse population geographically, right? So we think more than just the minority piece, but from the full scope. Challenges with hiring diverse talent. This could be organizationally an issue, but for groups, understanding how you look to post your requisitions on job boards that garner minority perspectives. Number 3, how diversity impacts hiring decisions. You want to employ the best people for the job always. And you give people chances where you see that you can. Meaning, if you have a diverse group of individuals, and there may be a minority, right, that doesn't go above and beyond the minimum qualifications, but you feel that they're the right fit, and you can train them to do the job, that's a great hire. Number 4, implementing diversity. You want to ensure every candidate has the same experience. So from the interviewer process, you ensure that the same questions are asked and evaluated the same way. You can gather your interviewers together and determine if you're looking at similar attributes, what qualifications you're looking for, establish those sets of questions, discuss how you eliminate bias. Many people can have a bias where you see Arizona State University as where they're an alum. You're like, oh, there's a great connection there. As soon as they walk in, you're welcoming them differently than you would from someone else that graduated from University of Arizona. Right, so you want to make sure you're eliminating biases. Lastly, implementing diverse practices. Again, be clear about qualifications and attributes. Determine what those attributes are. When they come in, are you looking for flexibility? Someone who's always helpful, someone who's always open to receiving feedback. So Tango mentioned the STAR method, right? As an interviewee, you may be asked how you've handled certain situations, and you implement the STAR method. From the interviewer perspective, there are certain keywords you're listening for. And so as a whole, there are candidates that will get marked higher and deemed more qualified for the role based on their responses. And for any of you that don't know what the STAR method is, it's describe the situation, identify the task, what is the action, and how did you resolve it? What was the end result? That's all I have for you. So we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Carletta. Out of curiosity, I have a question for you. You mentioned about, biases, which is, very important to make sure we don't have those in the moment, right? But how can organizations ensure that the interview process is actually inclusive and welcoming to candidates from diverse backgrounds? What is something that they can do?
Absolutely. So going back to the biases piece, learning what biases are. There are many. So again, school background, geographical background, industry background. Checking yourself, self-awareness, and understanding I'm going to be open to whomever sits in front of me. When you're going through the interview selection process, sometimes you can tell that they're a minority. And if I am able to be real here and transparent, right? We are able to look at a resume from top to bottom and decide that they are from a different ethnic background. And their resume, again, meets the bare minimum, but doesn't go above and beyond. Being open and receptive to say, while they meet the minimum qualifications, they don't go above and beyond, but I'm willing to give them the opportunity to engage.
Carletta, I have a question from the point of view of an interviewer. Is there as to be candid, is there a perceived amount of risk from the employer? So if you typically have like an ICP, you have an ideal candidate profile, there are certain trends and skills that people that do well at your company have, knowing that someone may not have those, but they have a diverse point of view or background, that it may be a good thing, it may not be a good thing, having a fresh set of eyes. How do you weigh that risk versus comparing that to what has traditionally worked really well?
So Tango, it's what we call a calculated risk. There are times where you're willing to step out of the norm and say, I'm willing to go the extra mile, put forth, and if I can speak personally, right, I'm going to step out on faith This is someone that has made a great impact on me. I want to give them an opportunity, and it's up to the candidate who becomes the employee to make the most of that opportunity. I think as the interviewer, it's also awesome to be transparent. Coming from a human resources background, transparency is critical. And so it's okay to say, candidate A, there are a few things that we don't have here within the organization, right? But what you do bring to the table, I'm willing to explore. Are you willing to take a calculated risk with me, and I'll help you along the way to get you to where you need to be, and we'll hope for success.
Mhm. So I've seen with a few interviews, towards the end of the rounds, they have the 30, 60, 90-day plans, and they kind of want to see your initiative to how quickly you'll ramp or be proactive. Is that a major component that goes into that calculated risk, or is that an exercise that you include to help make that calculation on if we are going to take a risk and here are the gaps we see them potentially having, working that into their onboarding, or seeing if they're going to proactively try to, if they're aware of those gaps, they have this self-awareness, and if they're going to proactively try to mitigate those things, is that something that's implemented, or what are your ideas around that?
So 30, 60, 90, if it is a part of your organization, it should be included with everyone's onboarding, right? So you're fair and consistent to everyone. Where you do see gaps as and Tango, I'm going to speak as if you're the interviewer and you're also the hiring manager, okay? So as a hiring manager, you've identified some gaps, and you can include those areas of opportunity within the 30, 60, 90.
Awesome. I feel like I'm cannibalizing the questions. I appreciate that. I'll give room for everyone else to ask.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, thank you all. Oh, go ahead,
I'll have
Tango.
one more if there's no one else. I've always been curious about this. So typically when you do an application, there is a DEI kind of inclusion section toward the end of applications and things, and it asks about your race and your background and veteran status, disabilities, and things like that. How much weight does that play into the hiring process, or are there is there like a checklist or a quota that organizations have to hit to hire X amount of veterans, disabled folks, minorities? And if that's the case, should minorities and folks lean into that in some way, shape, or form during the interview process?
Well, I always ask that people embrace who they are, right? And live who you are out loud. In regards to DEI minimum expectations and requirements, it's dependent upon the organization. Is it a public organization? Is it private, nonprofit, etc.? Those standards, depending on the org, are set by their HR department and by senior leader team, right? How diverse do we want to be? And they set, as Sentari mentioned, numbers matter. So if they would like a certain department to be 20% diverse, 30% women, then the expectation is that needs to be met from the recruitment process, from the recruitment team. It's best, I recommend you check the right boxes. You never know with companies if it matters or not. But it's best to, if you're of Hispanic ethnicity, African-American ethnicity, your race, right, you're Black, check the box.
Good to know. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Looks like there's a question in the chat. Oh, they use the Rooney Rule. Minimum diverse talent. I love that, Francisco.
Thank you so much, Carletta. Any other final words as we close out your section around the interview process?
Thank you, Veronica, for asking. Closing thoughts. As interviewers, keep in mind as you're here learning more about DEI, definitely learn how to remove biases. Educate yourself on biases and what that looks and feels like. Be open to hiring the person that on paper they got into the room. They may not have made the most effective impression on you, but you're like, I like them. They could be good. I'll train them to do what needs to be done, right? There's something good that could come from that. So calculated risks are good. From an interviewer perspective, always prepare. Be comfortable in your responses. And this one tidbit, if you're asked a question that you're not sure of what the response is, what it should be from you, answer authentically. Be genuine. Thank you all.
Thank you, Carletta. I love that. I'm seeing a theme of like authenticity, both with Sentari and Carletta here. Thank you so much, Carletta. Now, as we are finishing off this panel, we have Ines Hayouna, who will be discussing some tips on negotiations. Ines, thank you for being here, and we'll pass it on over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm so excited to be here today to speak on the topic of salary negotiations, and just amazing insight from both speakers prior to me. I think a lot of it kind of goes together. So I'm excited to kind of round us out. So I'll start off by giving you some high-level background on DEI and salary negotiations, what we're seeing today in the industry. Demographic factors can influence how people approach these negotiations. So I wanted to share some interesting statistics that I learned. So first with gender, I was kind of surprised with this one, but according to a recent study conducted by Vanderbilt University, it showed that 54% of women reported negotiating offers compared to 44% of men. It's also interesting to see how different generations negotiate. For example, 53% of Gen Z and 46% of millennial workers are always negotiating for new job offers. On the flip side, only about 23% of Gen X and 15% of boomers are engaging in these salary negotiations. Individuals with higher levels of education, such as those with like advanced degrees or specialized certifications, may have more bargaining power during salary negotiations. And then negotiation norms can vary significantly depending on occupation and industry. So salary negotiation was most common among advertising, marketing, and tech professionals. At the opposite end, accounting and law professionals actually had the lowest negotiation percentage. So with this number, we can maybe assume that initial offers in accounting and law might have been more in line with candidate expectations. We can't ignore the obvious impact that ethnicity and race plays in salary negotiations, with minorities often facing additional barriers to advocating for higher pay. For negotiations with for example, Asian American Pacific Islander women working full-time are still typically paid 85 cents for every dollar paid to white men. As a result of this, they lose about $400,000 over the span of a 40-year career. And finally, geographic location and cost of living can influence, these negotiation dynamics. Individuals in high-cost areas may have higher salary expectation to offset living expenses. So thinking about like cities like LA or New York versus Oklahoma and Idaho. I'd love to get into, on the next slide, we have some best practices when negotiating salaries. So I broke them down into 6 different steps. The first would be knowing your worth. So, before doing any or entering any negotiation, doing your research, understanding your worth. You can use online tools, industry reports, utilize your network to find out the range of your for the salary or for your role. You should also consider, your unique contributions and achievements that could add value to the organization. The second step would be to prepare your case. So this is the big one. You're going to want to make sure that you're looking at yourself, but not only yourself, the company as well. You should have a specific number or range in mind, as well as rationale for why you deserve it. We can go to the next slide, Tori. If you want $100,000 salary, don't just arbitrarily pull that out of the air. Understand how you got to that number, using data and evidence and examples to support your claims. The next part of preparing your case would be, negotiations when they're not just for a new organization, but just an internal promotion, for example. Ensure that you have your updated resume in front of you and prepare to discuss any of those outcomes, deliverables, and measurable results. When preparing your case, make sure you're also reviewing stats. Think through, your successes and also through the opportunities for improvement. When we're talking about success, employers really want to hear and see the tangible results. What did you accomplish and how did it affect the organization? You should also be ready to negotiate other aspects of your compensation package. So that could be benefits, bonuses, other perks that may benefit your overall satisfaction and well-being. And then finally, make sure that you are researching the organization itself, understanding their values and mission statement, and seeing how you align and can maybe impact their strategic goals. So once you've prepared your case, go ahead and make sure that you're communicating with confidence and avoid any common pitfalls that might undermine your position or your credibility. So that would be like apologizing, hesitating when you're, giving your stated desired salary or responding to an offer. Instead, you should focus on expressing the value you can add to the organization. That will allow you to communicate with more confidence. The fourth suggestion or strategy would be to seek feedback and support from those who can help you improve your skills and outcomes. You could ask for advice and guidance from mentors, peers, or experts, people who have gone through salary negotiations if this was your first time. You could also seek feedback from your employer or the recruiter after the negotiations or even during the negotiation process to learn from your strengths and weaknesses. And then flexibility is very essential to the negotiation process. So really understand your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, remote work versus in-office work, prioritize your goals, and decide how flexible you can really be. What is your motivation for this role? Is it compensation, work-life balance? Would you accept more vacation pay or a higher salary? By embracing flexibility, you'll increase your chances of securing a job offer that would meet your expectations. And then finally, in conclusion, salary negotiations, they can be really tough. They can be nerve-wracking. But when you have a successful discussion, it sends two positive messages to your employer. The first is that you're serious and committed to the opportunity, which is a great sign for any leader. And then the second is that you're someone who's focused on the value of your work that you do. And I think that the employer will certainly respect that directness. And on the last slide, I've added some online resources that we use as recruiters that I think are helpful for both candidates and hiring leaders. So yeah, and I'd love to connect with you all. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I just wanted to open it up to any questions.
As usual, I have questions. The first one, so I recently came across the concept of brag books, which I'm not sure if it's kind of ubiquitous across all industries, but it's essentially, like you mentioned, keeping a track record of things that you've accomplished or delivered for the company, kind of quantifying the benefits and kind of keeping this ammunition for the day you ask for a raise to go, well, this is what I've done. It's documented. This justifies why I'm asking for this. What's your experience with that, or is that something that you all suggest or have heard of previously?
Absolutely. I think that's super valuable. And when you're, scheduling that meeting for that salary negotiation, whether it is, responding to the offer or even a promotion, you can just have that pulled up, be very specific. And I think that the employer, the hiring manager, really appreciates that. The conversation is very targeted, and they can really just see the evidence right away. So
Yeah.
I highly recommend that as well.
I had two. Double-barreled
Yeah.
question. I tried to break it up. The second one is I'd be curious your point of view. So I have my own, but I'm curious your point of view on coming to the negotiation table with competing offers. So proactively, maybe going through another interview process, having something to say, hey, I would love to stay here, but I have to do right by, myself, my family, whatever. I have a competing offer. This is what it looks like. Will you match it? Do you think that is more received, or that comes across detrimental that you were going behind the company's back and interviewing, or does it show your value by someone else is willing to pay me a higher amount, thus I am worth that amount?
Absolutely. Great question. I think being transparent is my go-to. So with your meeting with the recruiter, for example, prior to letting them know that, hey, I'm applying, I have other offers on the table, or letting them know what your desired salary, compensation range is right now. And then the recruiter on the other side, making sure, they're asking along the way, has it changed? Have you received this offer? What's going on? Just being very open with that communication, I think is really helpful when you're making that when you're having that conversation with the employer, so that there are no surprises. We try to not have any surprises, but there always tend to be a few.
Yeah, of course.
Ines, I got a quick question for you. I really appreciate the presentation. So I think sometimes what we'll notice is that someone will apply and they won't have done their homework, and they'll be way over where our range is.
Right.
Which is always tough because they tend to be great. What are your suggestions for researching salaries? I was helping a good friend who was trying to figure out salary. He was going to go have a negotiation with his boss at the state, and it was hard for him to find that data so he could have a good discussion. What do you suggest?
That's a great, that does happen quite a bit. And I think that doing that market research before, so even asking the recruiter or, I don't know, they have a mentor or a peer that they can go to and trust, hearing what they're making, if they're willing to disclose that and be transparent, that's great. But also websites like salary.com, I think you can find comparable salaries for that position, and as well, and also, looking at cost of living in that as well, it'll take it into account. That website that I posted, or I had on the screen, has a calculator, which cost of living calculator as well, which are great. And Tango, thank you for adding that in the chat. Glassdoor, Fishbowl, or other great sources or resources for you all to look at.
Awesome. Thank you. This is great. Appreciate it.
Of course.
I have a question. As someone who was raised, to not ask for money, be happy where you are, that you have a job, the stats earlier that you mentioned really resonate with me, especially as a woman. This is personal. I'm actually literally about to do this, so I'm so excited for this conversation. What if you're currently in a role and you're being promoted into a new role, but it's brand new in the organization? So they made it based off of strategic need. So you don't have a lot to go off of in regards to, connecting with other employees, because that role didn't exist before. It is larger scope and expanded work. Is there kind of when you don't really have it, is there a go-to oh, it's not worth negotiating if it's under 10% or anything like that you would recommend? Or
that's
we also use COLA, which is interesting. We don't use cost of living. So
okay. Okay,
yeah,
that's very interesting. I don't necessarily have a number for you right now, but I would certainly look at what you're making now, right? And then how much more time and effort, and what's the scope, right? The scope you mentioned is larger. So I don't know. I think that speaking to that in that conversation is very, very important. And just mentioning, and like I said, being transparent with them at the front end, I'm looking for, this role is bigger, it's a larger scope. Where, is there room? What is that? What's your top end? What's your budget? I think just having that conversation early on in the process is just very important as well.
And is there an approach to how you initially bring up? I imagine, Veronica, it's a maybe uncomfortable conversation to just spring out of nowhere. Is there a story you go to the table with where you say, hey, I'm stepping into this role, the scope is larger, it's going to take up more bandwidth, more mental energy, that is going to impact my at-home life, time with my family, time with this and that, which is worth this amount to me. So I would like this amount increased to offset that. Is there anything like that you bring to kind of initiate that conversation, or any tactics there?
Absolutely. I think, having like your brag book, your list, your any sort of evidence or any research that you've done before to that conversation will only help you make your case for why you want to move up in the salary range. So I highly recommend to do that as well.
Hi, Ines. So kind of
Hi.
piggybacking off of Tingo's question. So typically, when do you see that? Like, so probably this would be more geared towards like existing employees at your current company. Like, when's a good time? Should you be waiting like your mid-year or year-end evaluation time, or should this discussion be happening well before that time?
That's a great question. I think the best times are to do it like during those mid-year reviews, end of year, but that doesn't just have to happen then. I think mentioning it to your boss or your whoever your direct report is above you, I think mentioning that throughout the year, and just like I would, again, with the brag book, having like, oh, I did that. I mentioned this now in this conversation, just keeping that going, I think is really helpful. That way, when your meeting comes, it's not a surprise to the employer that you're, seeking a move up.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thank you, Tingo, for that brag book suggestion. Great idea.
I had to retroactively work on one, which was fun to go ask people, 2-3 years ago, hey, can you sign off on the thing that I did 2 years ago? Because I'm making this brag book. Yeah.
I have a question. Hi. My name's Madeline. I have a question, and that is just that I also am about to be promoted and have prepared to negotiate and have what I feel like is a really well-researched number, and I feel really confident in that. However, I have kind of heard the conventional wisdom is to shoot higher so that there's room to negotiate. But because I feel like so confident in that number, it feels uncomfortable to ask higher if it feels like less justified to me. So I was just wondering on what your advice is, if you feel like something's really concrete, so you just go in with that, or is it important to inflate that number for the sake of negotiation?
That's a really good question. You're saying that you have this number that you think is like fair and like this is what you'd be okay with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've noticed that people, or the candidates that I work with, do come in a little higher, and then they tell me like it's okay. And I think it can be helpful to sometimes inflate a little bit, but it not by like a lot. I wouldn't advise, to go another 10,000, 20,000. I think that, if you're very confident in this number, you think they could match it, I say that number. But if you think like maybe there is some wiggle room, or maybe I can make my case, I would go up a little bit and just see how they respond.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. So my only question is, okay, how would you start that conversation? Just for like a lot of us, like how do you go into your boss or supervisor and be like, how would you start that negotiation process?
I think, again, having your evidence, right? Having your backup, saying why you deserve this number, or why you think you are, not being paid the right amount, whatever that might be, respectfully, of course, and just make sure that you're able to speak to that confidently and communicate that confidently. I would not, I would make sure not to, like I said, inflate it too high, because I think that could kind of bite you in the butt. But I would definitely just be very logical and be able to like explain why and how you got there.
And if I could give some input, Marcus, I think planting those seeds, I guess there's two ways you can go about it. I think it might be beneficial when you start at a company or earlier on before your performance reviews to kind of put those feelers out there to say, hey, when is the typical promotion cycle? What is the criteria for being promoted? Just so they know what's on your mind. And then having those discussions along the way and saying, hey, you know, at some point in the near future, I'd like to open up some dialogue around what the process, the road to promotion would look like. So then you can begin to start to track that brag book and say, okay, this is what you said is required to get to this senior level position. I have accomplished these things. And then maybe even tie that to some personal goals. Say, hey, you know, I'm planning to buy a house in the near future. I'm starting to save money. So this kind of ties along with that and kind of make all the pieces make sense and tell that whole story. Going back to Sentari's point about kind of the brand and telling your story, now we have the evidence, we have the story, we have the superpowers, we have all the reasons to justify why you're asking for it, not because you just, to Veronica's point, you're not just being greedy and just want more money. There are reasons you want a promotion. I want a higher status and higher title. I want more work. I want to be more challenged. Or, you know, inflation is rough and the cost of living in Arizona is going up. I want nice things. I think I deserve them. So I'd like more money, please.
More money,
Yeah,
please.
I completely agree. No, thank you for that, Tango. It's true. Because a lot of times when situations like that happen, a lot of people just tell me like, oh, you know, go interview with other people, bring back a different offer letter, or a lot of PMs I hear about job hopping where, you know, that apparently that's the quickest way you can get in terms of your worth or value. And to me, I guess I'm a little old school. I'm like, I don't like to job hop often or at all, especially for organizations that I enjoy working with. But at the same time, I still want to be paid what I'm worth.
So y'all, we have time for one more question and then we're gonna head into our discussion. But Leandra, thanks for raising your hand. If you want to ask your question to Ines.
Awesome. Hi, Ines. Thank you for all the great insight. Kind of going off of what we were just talking about, I don't know if you have any recommendations or suggestions if your manager is kind of the response that you're getting in requests to, you know, trying to negotiate is that the company just does not have the resources for that. And then even at, okay, please check in about 6 months later and still met with that response, kind of what, you know, how to navigate that situation.
Yeah, that is something that I come across. And I think, you know, continuing to have those conversations, if it's like a growth thing, it's like they're at this point, the company is not in a growth mode. They're in a cost saving mode, realizing that could be a factor. I would say continue to have those conversations so that they're still on the radar of your employer and that maybe this just isn't the right time, and come a year or 6 months down the line, it will be. So I wouldn't give up and just be like, oh, I'm good. I don't need to do this anymore. Like you should still be advocating for yourself because you're your best advocate, right? But know that sometimes companies are not in that mode yet, or maybe they're just taking a break right now. They need to focus on other things. So I wouldn't give up, but I'd still continue to have those conversations in those mid-year promotion conversation meetings.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Of course.
Ines, thank you so much. Any like closing thoughts after hearing questions for your session?
Yeah, I just would, you know, echo what everyone's been saying. I think it can be tough to have these conversations, but I really, I think it's important to do so, and just continue to elevate your brand, continue to elevate yourself, and be your best advocate and continue to do so as you grow.
I love that. And I love the slide, the know your worth slide.
Yes,
That
yes.
is so, so true to remember. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists who are here today. I'm going to pass it on over to Tango for our open discussion section.
Yep, so we're gonna jump into some open discussions. You can ask a few questions to the panel. Or do we want to, Veronica, your mind, do we want to break it out into groups or just have open dialogue?
I think with this group, we could do some open dialogue with the smaller group. What do you all think?
I think that works well. I've
Great.
been so pleased with all the great dialogue.
Great.
That being said, are there any particular points? I know we had some structured conversation around a couple key themes. Anything outlying that we didn't get to address, things outside of those three components that might be on anyone's mind, or that they have been struggling with, or I know a few folks have mentioned they're looking to do promotions or to be promoted recently. Anything that we haven't covered that we can poll the whole group or the panelists specifically?
Hi
And feel
there.
free to drop them in the chat or speak up, come off mute. There we go.
Yeah, hi. No, I just wanted to reiterate what one of the panelists kind of mentioned on, like, you know, applying and having somebody give you a shot. Like, I came from a nonprofit. I've done government relations, community relations for corporate for a long time. And I got into tech. I work for Lyft now. And I actually had somebody say, I'm going to be your Silicon Valley Sherpa. And they kind of have been. And so I've since gotten like 3 or 4 promotions. I've worked my ass off and, of course, made my value very much well known. And then made a transition to government relations. And so now I'm one of the lobbyists for the business. And so it's allowed me this growth and this pathway that I otherwise would have not been able to have. But it came with a lot of personal sacrifice and a lot of trust and being accountable to your mentor, right? Like, they're putting their reputation on the line. They're bringing you in. That's not the time to be entitled. That's not the time to be whatever. That's the time to work your ass off, pardon my language, and bust that door open and make sure that you do such a good job that then you can hold that door open for other people. And that came with a lot of selling myself. It came with calling her, calling people around her, people I previously worked with, and really advocating for myself, really intentionally submitting, you know, damn near stalking people on LinkedIn. And so it's super helpful. And then with internal negotiations, let's just be transparent. They suck, right? Like, you sometimes get hired at a lower rate. As you try to progress, they'll say you max out at 7% and you can't grow beyond that. And so sometimes there are just hard set policies and limitations. And I think Sentari kind of noted it, right? It's if you're not growing or if your salary is not growing with the pace that you want, you also have to make some tough decisions. As that place might not be your best place for this next couple of years, there may be an opportunity for you to return in a more senior capacity as well. That has been helpful as well. And thank you all so much for the insight. I had questions around kind of the balancing of like personal brand and professional brand. I tend to mix them up a little bit, or I choose my platforms, right? On kind of how I share certain things. But this has been incredibly helpful. So thank you so much.
Francisco, were there any particular tactics or stories you told to help get people to take that risk on you, or to kind of give them some peace of mind on taking that risk?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't ask for letters of recommendations, but I had them from colleagues that they had linked on LinkedIn, that we had connections to, that I submitted that were supplemental documents beyond my cover letter and my resume. Like I said, I reached out via LinkedIn with people who serve in that same department and offered opportunities to like connect with them. And then you just really got to sell yourself, right? To somebody's point earlier about like not bragging on yourself, it's you must. No one else is going to do it. And you're already facing, especially as a person of color, you're facing significant barriers. And so no one's going to do the work for you. No one's going to advocate for you, right? And so those, I think, were the best kind of tactics. And then goofy stuff, but it works, right? Like your power poses before your interviews, talking to yourself in the mirror, the practicing of what you're going to say. dressing right for the situation, even if it's a virtual meeting, being thoughtful about where you're taking certain calls from and making sure that you're in a quiet, secure place with good connections. Just those little soft tactics that I think we sometimes oversee can be critical in making a good first impression as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's to your point. I wanted to touch on that one. We didn't put it on the agenda. Interview etiquette with professional attire or business casual, and kind of what that looks like, and what, I mean, with the modern day of Zoom interviews and meetings, like your backdrop and everything. I think there is a level of kind of unconscious bias that might play into organizations, and if they see you with a particular backdrop, or the wrong color. I wear pink to interviews and things, but traditionally kind of blues and grays and blacks are kind of business settings. So I think being aware of your audience and the interviewer and how they might perceive certain things also plays into it as well. So at some point, maybe a future forum going to some of the more interview etiquette will be interesting. Kind of what to say, what not to say, what to have around you, things of that nature.
It's funny you say that, Tango. I think my first interview, I interviewed in a full suit, and they were like, "What are you doing? This is tech. Like, we don't dress like that."
Yeah.
And again, but certain situations called for it. But to your point, like knowing who you're speaking with and the kind of candor you're speaking with has been incredibly helpful.
Yeah, same boat. I always wear a full suit, at least to the first one. So I own one. I'm capable of being presentable. But again, if we're in tech, we can wear a hoodie or a fleece on the second or third interview. So things like that, I think, are good to know, relevant to your industry.
One thing that we always notice, or I always watch for, regardless of who's interviewing, is it's always interesting when you go through an interview and you get to the part where you ask if they have any questions. And more often than not, people are kind of like, no, I really don't. And it's always strange because they clearly can't know everything about the company. And it tells you whether or not they've done any research. And the ones that do, it's always that's so impressive. Someone who's obviously looked at your website, done some research, and can ask a good question. And that to me, they're going to get another interview. And so that's one that I always stress.
Yeah, and I think it also shows a level of options. So it comes across, maybe, I don't want to say desperate, but if you're interviewing with one company and all your eggs are in this basket, you're just like, please hire me. I have no qualms, anything or whatever you offer, I'll take. Whereas a person who has 3 or 4 different offers, they're going to want to make sure they have the best fit. So they're going to be interviewing you just as much as you're interviewing them. And I think interviewers notice that this person asking a lot of really pointed, targeted questions, or they have assumptions or points of views about how we do things. They're probably talking to multiple people. They're probably doing their due diligence, and that's going to automatically make you perceived as more valuable, or at least more invested, rather than just someone who wants a job and will take any job.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Any other interesting points of views, questions? I think stories. I think it's great for everyone to kind of share their experiences, recent horror stories, nightmare scenarios, any really great things that has happened, anything along those lines from the group? It's a safe space. Oh, maybe not.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you to our wonderful presenters, Sentari, Carletta, Ines, as well as Tango and Veronica for keeping us all in line. Our DEI committee members, to all of you who are attending, we really appreciate it. These are really valuable conversations. Interesting for me because I'm usually on the other end. I'm hiring people, and it's fascinating for me to hear what people are thinking, and for me to think about perhaps there are some things that I'm doing subconsciously that I need to be aware of. So I really appreciated the conversation. This is really important work and important conversations, and we're going to continue to press on with our DEI efforts. This is a part of our DNA, and we believe it makes it Phoenix a better place to live, work, and do business. So to that point, we're going to send out a survey on the forum, and we really appreciate for you just to take a few minutes to fill it out. And what this does is allow us to develop future programming. That's how we got here. That's how we have these amazing presenters and these amazing moderators. It's because we heard from you and we were able to build a better program. So please let us know, and also spread the word. I think there are some parts of the world that are sort of deciding that DEI is not important, or worse, that it's a negative. We don't believe that. We believe that it's an important thing for us to continue to focus on. So spread the word out there. Make sure people know what we're doing together. And then keep an eye out for our next forum, which will be on Wednesday, June 5th. And like I said, we're excited to work with you, walk beside you, and serve as your resource as you go down this journey. So with that, thank you all once again. Have a great rest of the week, and we will see you all very soon. Take care.